And the travel industry, of course, has been one of the most hardest hit because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even as there are glimmers of hope, the Delta variant, of course, may slow the path back to whatever a new normal might look like. For the cruise industry, that means new requirements of masking and testing. So what will that do to customer demand? Jan Swartz is president of Princess Cruises. Jan, great to have you with us. Appreciate it. And let's just start right there with what you're seeing, if anything, by way of reaction to the increase in Delta. Is it showing up in your bookings?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. We are so excited to get back into business safely. And I recently sailed on Majestic Princess, and I can say that cruise demand is strong among our guests who are thrilled to be back taking a real vacation, as well as our teammates and the communities in Alaska that we're visiting along the way. So lots of positive momentum in the cruise business as we get more ships back in action. That said, obviously the Delta variant has its challenges, and so we have many layers of protections for our guests on Princess Cruise Line. We are sailing with vaccinated cruises per CDC guidelines. So that means vaccinated guests and vaccinated crew.
Well, on the subject of vaccination requirements, Norwegian over the weekend won a preliminary court injunction allowing them to have a vaccine requirement because, of course, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, did not want that in place. Florida now is appealing that decision. How vital is vaccination requirement for the cruise industry?
Well, I won't comment on another cruise line's legal proceedings. What I can say is for our brand at Princess Cruises, the cruises that we've announced through the end of the year are vaccinated per CDC policy. So this gives layers of protection and comfort to our guests, which we've learned through our guest surveys is very important to them, that they would sail on a cruise with vaccinated guests and vaccinated crew. That being said, we also have other layers of protection, as you mentioned, certainly in light of the Delta variant, with now requiring pre-cruise testing within 72 hours of embarkation, as well as wearing masks in the more dense parts of the ship.
We do know, unfortunately, that while vaccination obviously slows the spread and makes any kind of acquisition of this virus less serious in every way, it doesn't mean people can't get COVID. And there have been, of course, these so-called breakthrough events. Do you worry about turning a ship into a quarantine location again, as we kind of so dramatically saw at the beginning of this pandemic? That does linger in some people's minds. Folks were actually trapped on board ships. Could that happen again if you had an outbreak of COVID among vaccinated passengers?
Well, we've worked very closely with the U.S. CDC and other medical and public health advisors to put in place policies and practices and procedures to protect our guests, our teammates, and the communities that we visit. And so I think we can all expect that, given how pervasive the Delta variant is in the United States, that we will see cases in the cruise industry. But we have among the best protections in the larger leisure business. I don't think there's very many land-based resorts that have a vaccinated environment. And then, of course, all sorts of policies and procedures such that if we have guests that would test positive, we would have cabins for isolation, all onboard staff of doctors, nurses, paramedics to take care of them, and also to complete contact tracing and help mitigate the risk to other people on board.
Yeah, and of course, other people on board doesn't just include the passengers, it includes the crew as well. And speaking of the crew, we've seen in the service industry some real labor shortages developing, and because people are still until September making a certain amount of in unemployment benefits, it's just hard to get people in the door. Are you experiencing any of that on the labor front?
I would share that our crew comes from over 100 countries around the world, and we've seen strong demand to return to work. And yet, while sailing in Alaska and thanking all the Alaska citizens that supported their congressmen and senators and the like for the Alaska Tourism Restoration Act, which enabled us to get back into business and help support those Alaskan communities that are so dependent on tourism, right, for their economies. As I stopped in each port of call and met with local business owners and citizens, I did hear a lot about labor shortages and how, after being out of business, so to speak, in Alaska, those small business owners were struggling to find the full complement of staff. And so while that worked for this year because we had fewer ships sailing in Alaska, we obviously have a joint interest in making sure that we create more jobs in Alaska and that we recruit more folks, whether they're college students, retirees, or anyone else looking for summer adventures.